Okay, so I'm gonna say it, and I don't care if people flame me for it, but the GTX 1080 Ti was too good when it was released. There, I said it. I can't take it back. But I'm pretty sure the general consumer would actually agree with me. It was a huge step up from its predecessor in both performance and efficiency. They've all kind of had some huge boots to fill. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. Hello mate, you alright? Yeah, just got all the bits from my banging new gaming PC. Just got to put it together. It's going to be so much better than yours. Oh, right. What did you get then? The latest Intel 12th gen processor, a feature-packed motherboard, and 32 gig of DDR4 memory. See? Miles ahead of yours. You realise that board needs DDR5 memory, don't you? Don't tell me you went and bought the wrong stuff. DDR4 is so 2014. I can't believe you was that stupid. What? No, you're joking. What should I get then? For me, I'd be looking at Corsair's newest Vengeance DDR5 kits, or if you're wanting that all-important RGB, then go for the Dominator Platinum RGB. Oh, you are a lifesaver, thanks, but where can I find out more? By clicking the link in the description below, of course. You call me the stupid one. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been revisiting old graphics cards, mainly from the 10 series, to see how they hold up in 2022. And for the most part, it's a bit of a no-brainer that they still hold their own, even in the latest titles, and offer far superior value for money, even if it does mean buying on the dreaded used market, especially now that prices have actually started to settle down somewhat. Now, when the 1080 Ti came out back in March of 2017, its little brothers, the 1080 and 1070, had already been out for a good kind of 10 months or so. So it kind of felt a little bit late to the party. And I think Nvidia knew that it had to offer up something special to warrant people buying it. And performance-wise, had to be far enough apart from the GTX 1080 to demand another $100 from gamers. And yeah, it did. Not only did it come with more memory, it came with faster memory and a faster memory interface too. It quickly became the most powerful graphics card on the planet that could handle practically anything that you threw at it, including any resolution, including 4K, which at the time was still a bit of a mirage or like a distant fairy tale for the average gamer. So fast forwarding to 2022, and with the ability to buy a 1080 Ti for around $235 in the US and around £230 in the UK, there are a few questions that need to be asked. The first being, how does a beastly card from many moons ago perform in 2022? And more importantly, how does it compare against a card like the RX 6600 that comes in around $35 more expensive in the shops? Well, to find out, we threw the GTX 1080 Ti into our X570 based test system with an Asus Crosshair 8 Dark Hero motherboard, Ryzen 9 5900X, and 32 gig of Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB 3600MHz dual channel memory. Due to the age of the cards we tested and the fact that not all of them support it, Smart Access Memory and Resizable Bar have been disabled. Now, I did mention that the 1080 Ti was a beast back in the day, but with the way that games have been made and developed for the modern day and the performance that we actually expect, we've run all of the games on the medium preset, or medium settings when presets weren't available. Also, we ended up testing a little under 20 games in total, and through this video, we'll be looking at about half that. Otherwise, we'd frankly be here all day. We will, however, be using all of the titles to look at the overall average gaming FPS later on in this video, and if you want to see all of the charts for all of the games, we'll be posting them up on our Patreon, where you get a ton of other benefits, including exclusive behind the scenes content, bi-weekly game nights where you get a chance to kill me in game, and much more. The link for that is down below. That out of the way, let's get into the games. First up is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where we see the GTX 1080 Ti sitting comfortably in second place, just below the RX 6600. Although second, the GTX 1080 Ti is close behind with an average FPS of 97, with a 3 FPS difference to the RX 6600's 100 FPS. The 1% lows, however, aren't as close. The GTX 1080 Ti sits at 54, placing it lower than both the cards above and below it. For Call of Duty Warzone, we see the GTX 1080 Ti taking first place over the RX 6600 by around 5.5%. The GTX 1080 Ti comes in with an average FPS of 130 and a 1% low of 110 FPS, putting it higher than the rest of the stack, though the RX 6600 is very close in both the average and 1% lows. Now moving on to CSGO, we again see the GTX 1080 Ti holding first place with a giant 927 FPS average. We also see the GTX 1080 managing to rise up the charts and has now taken second place with an average of 748 FPS. What's interesting here is that the 1080 Ti is now sitting 73% higher in performance than the newer RX 6600, though the 1% lows really do dip on all cards in this game. Cyberpunk 2077 has the GTX 1080 Ti losing its top place and dropping down to third. However, with the reputation that Cyberpunk has for being demanding on your hardware, an average FPS of 72 is still respectable and leaves it sitting only 2% away from the top spot RX 6600. For the 1% lows, we do see the RTX 3050 fighting the GTX 1080 Ti for third place with a matching result of 47 FPS, placing them both below the RX 5600 XT, which sits in second. In Dying Light 2, we see the GTX 1080 Ti fighting to prove itself as it's now back on top with a small 6% lead over the RX 6600. With an average FPS of 89, it's a perfectly acceptable result for what is quite a demanding game on older hardware. Looking at the 1% lows, the GTX 1080 Ti shows some strong performance here too, with no noticeable dips when compared to the other cards. Looking at FarCry 6, we can see the GTX 1080 Ti sitting comfortably above the GTX 1080 by around 11%, with an average FPS of 110. However, it's fighting for that second place spot with a whole 1 FPS between itself and the RX 5600 XT. When looking at the 1% lows, where it scores a respectable 91 FPS, the 5600 XT does have slightly stronger performance, but only by around 5.5%. In Gears 5, we see the GTX 1080 Ti shoot ahead with an average FPS of 178, putting it a whopping 19% ahead of the second place 1080 non-Ti, and 26% ahead of the newer RX 6600. The 1% low shoot even further ahead with a huge 25% lead over the GTX 1080, leaving it sitting comfortably at the top by quite some margin. Halo Infinite shows the GTX 1080 Ti ahead of the RX 6600 by around 10% in the averages. Sadly, the 1% lows tell a slightly different story, where we actually see the 6600 sitting 14% ahead of the 1080 Ti. If we were to sort our data by 1% lows, the 1080 Ti would actually be sitting somewhere in the middle of our pack. Now moving on to Horizon Zero Dawn, we can see the GTX 1080 Ti holding first place with a 10% lead over the GTX 1080 non-Ti, which also sees a slight lead over the RX 6600. With a result of 103 FPS in the 1% lows, it does sit 3 FPS below the RX 6600 in third place, but 5 FPS above the GTX 1080 in second place, which isn't uncommon seeing newer cards with lower dips in performance. Looking at Resident Evil Village, we see the RX 6600 now sitting 17% ahead of the 1080 Ti, though the Pascal-based GPU still manages to hold its own against the 5600 XT, with its very own 10% lead. Looking at the 1% lows, where the 1080 Ti scores 144 FPS, it cements itself in second place, fitting nicely between the card above and the card below it. For The Witcher 3, we can see the GTX 1080 Ti storms ahead of all the other cards with an average FPS lead of 28% over the next best card, the GTX 1080. The lead over the RX 6600 now sits comfortably at 36% faster, and the performance also looks good within the 1% lows, where the extra performance and beefier VRAM really does start making a difference as we look down the stack. Finally, Rainbow Six Siege being as well optimised as it is, we see a huge 355 average FPS for the GTX 1080 Ti, leaving it as the king in this title. When drilling down though, it's only actually a 6% lead over the RX 6600, which doesn't sound as extravagant. In the 1% lows, we see the same story again, where the newer card, being the RX 6600, has less dips overall and a more consistent gameplay experience overall. So 12 games that we've gone through, though as mentioned we did test a lot more, and you can see all of that data over on our Patreon. The link for that is down below. Now what we're actually able to do, however, is to take all of the games we tested and calculate the overall average performance of the GTX 1080 Ti to see kind of how things look overall. I mean, come on, no one buys a gaming PC to simply play one game. So having a kind of broader picture across a variety of games and genres really allows us to make some better observations overall. Especially as while in our tests the GTX 1080 did, for the most part, jump around between first and kind of third place. So what I want to know is, how did it actually do overall? Well, if we look at the averages, it's pretty clear to see that the gains that the 1080 Ti made in a lot of the games like CSGO, Gears 5 and The Witcher 3 really helped it to kind of propel its performance score overall, as it sits 19% ahead of the competition, the RX 6600, in the averages. Where things do get interesting though is that the GTX 1080 non-Ti comes in with nigh on identical performance to the RX 6600, though it does suffer slightly in the 1% lows. And speaking of the 1% lows, while the 1080 Ti still does push ahead, it's only by 5.5% over the RX 6600. So suffered kind of more dramatic dips. And I honestly put this down to the age of the card and how games are more geared towards newer hardware. Now, I wanted to do a couple of things today, and one of them was to look at how the 1080 Ti holds itself in 2022, as it was a beast back in the day. And if anything, like I said at the start, it was too good when it launched. And while it's now, I guess, slightly ahead of a low to mid tier current gen GPU, I'm going to say it's pretty decent for something that launched 5 to 6 years ago. Didn't you agree? Sure, the newer card fared better in some of the games and had better 1% lows, but when you're able to play some of the latest titles, on medium settings and get astronomical frame rates, who cares? It's all about having fun and saving money at the same time, right? Now, speaking of money, that's the other big thing, value for money. Now, if you already own a GTX 1080 Ti and you're watching this to see how it compared against some newer cards and were potentially looking to see if upgrading or sidestepping to a newer card was worth it, then you'll want to pay attention to this bit. If, however, you're faced with the choice of buying a 1080 Ti on the used market or buying something newer like an RX 6600, then you'll definitely want to pay attention here. So in the UK, where the average used price is around £230, you'll be pleased to see that the 1080 Ti is kind of middle of the road at £1.12 per frame. Yes, cards like the non-Ti will give you better value for money overall, but the 1080 Ti should give you that extra level of longevity with its higher capacity of memory and performance, and the memory which is faster too. Now, what is interesting though is how the RX 6600 is coming in more expensive at £1.73 per frame. So based on performance and cost, the 1080 Ti is clearly the better buy if you want higher frame rates and good value. Now, moving over to the US, things look even better for the 1080 Ti at $1.14 per frame, putting it close to the bottom of our stack. That's a good thing. Again, the 1080 non-Ti does offer better value at 87 cents per frame, but it's the same argument. Now, while that's a good card now, will it be in a year's time? Where, the 1080 Ti should still be chalking up some respectable numbers. It's a tough one to call, so I'm going to let you decide because I'm nice like that. For me, if you're looking on the used market, you have choice, and the 1080 Ti is a great one, it has to be said. And right now, I don't see anything newer that's better. If, however, you already own one and was looking to upgrade at this kind of price point of, the likes of the 6600, it really feels like an almost downgrade or a sidestep. So in my opinion, just don't bother. Let me know. Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments section, and also let me know what you want to see next. We've kind of exhausted testing on the 10 series now, so maybe we'll start looking at some older AMD GPUs instead, while we wait for new products to arrive from AMD, Intel and Nvidia. Either way, I'm interested to see what you guys want to see next, so let me know. Also, if you like this video, then a like and a sub to the channel would be absolutely beastly. And if you love what we do, consider supporting us on Patreon, where you'll get access to all those lovely bits of testing data for all the games we tested, plus many more benefits. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.